Hey there, I'm Hallie, and we are coming on the air right now with this highly anticipated news conference. It is set to start at any moment by the Los Angeles District Attorney. I want to show it to you here live really quickly. Here it is. This is the microphone where we expect to see him announcing his decision on the Menendez brothers. We understand that in the room are members of the Menendez family. The Menendez brothers' attorney is there as well, because whatever happens today could be a big deal in a case that has become infamous. Today's move by the DA may bring the brothers one step closer to freedom, possibly, although it would still be up to a judge to decide, depending on what the DA decides to do. The brothers say they killed their parents more than 30 years ago because their father was sexually molesting them, and they were afraid their parents would kill them so nobody would find out about the abuse. Erik Menendez was 18. Lyle was 21 at the time. Their initial trials, broadcast minute by minute back in the early 90s, the controversy quite literally putting networks like Court TV on the map and dividing the country over whether the brothers were cold-blooded killers or victims of abuse who were justified in what they did. And it's TV, again, that has brought their case back into the spotlight after Netflix released a drama series about the brothers and then put out a separate doc on them. Angela Sanadella is covering the legal angle for us. Dana Griffin is out in Los Angeles. So again, Dana, we are potentially just seconds away from this decision by the DA. I want to pull up that live shot again there. We've seen the room fill up. We've seen people you see them there overgathered by the doorway. This was supposed to start a couple of minutes ago, so we are on high alert for this. And it is a case that the country is watching so closely, Dana.
Absolutely. And Hallie, I'm watching on my cell phone now, too. Yeah. And you can see family members on the front row, the same family members who a week ago were calling for the Menendez brothers to be released. So it's likely that we will hear that announcement that they will be or that the DA is going to ask a judge to resentence them. Now, when we think about politics that are coming into play here, some think that the DA is using this as a tool for his political career. He is up for re-election this November. He is already trailing in the polls. And we've heard from the Los Angeles Association of Deputy District Attorneys. They wrote in a statement that they think Gascon is opportunistic, writing, quote, throughout his disastrous tenure as DA, Gascon has consistently prioritized celebrity cases over the rights of crime victims, showing more interest in being in the spotlight than upholding justice. Now, according to the DA's office, 300 people have been resentenced during his administration, including 28 people convicted of first-degree murder and 5 who were serving life without the possibility of parole. So when we look at what could happen here, if he were to ask a judge to set a status hearing, that could happen within 30 days. So say he loses the election in November, there is still plenty of time for this hearing to be held. And say the DA holds that hearing and decides on that day for that status hearing to resentence the brothers, we could have a decision before December 2nd when a new DA, if a new DA is elected, could be sworn in. So obviously politics playing a role here, but also the DA is saying that he's seeing the evidence and he thinks that these brothers should get another fair chance, possibly being released. Hallie?
Dan, I'm going to ask you to stand by because I want to bring in Angela Sanadella here. Again, as we're keeping an eye on the left-hand side of our screen, that is a live look at that room in Los Angeles right now, Angela. So Dana laid out the timeline here. Talk to us about what this means potentially practically for the Menendez brothers. If the DA were to come out and say that they should be resentenced, what does that functionally look like?
Well, so practically, it doesn't mean that they would be released today. It means, as Dana said, they would have to go in front of a judge, and the judge would have to approve the resentencing request. Now, look, it is most likely that the judge will go along with whatever the district attorney here does recommend, because we talk a lot in the law about burden. And in this case, if the DA and the defense both agree on a course of action, that they both submit petitions saying that these brothers should be released immediately due to resentencing, then the judge actually has to make an argument if he's going to disagree with them to say that there is enough evidence here to show that they are a threat, that this is wrong, and that we should absolutely keep them behind bars for public safety. So when we look at what will practically happen, if resentencing is requested here by the district attorney, it is then most likely the judge would approve that, in which case they would then be released, possibly immediately, if that is what the judge decides. Hallie?
Angela, stand by to you now, because Dana, we talked about the media attention on this case, that new Netflix series, the doc, et cetera. That's a dynamic that you have to talk about here. You can't ignore it in this instance.
Yeah, I mean, you've got people who are on TikTok asking the DA to take a look at this case. So he has received a lot of pressure, and some have said that pressure is why we're seeing him come out. We've got 3 press conferences in a month. Many people are questioning his motives because of that. But I think because you've got not only the Netflix documentaries and the docuseries, but also Peacock's docuseries that talked about the alleged abuse by one of the Menudo band members, Roy Rosello, who came out and said that he too was sexually abused by Jose Menendez, this RCA executive, the father of the Menendez brothers. So that's part of that new evidence that the DA is looking at to link these cases to say, you know, there may be something there. And I think the big issue that's coming up is about timing. You know, decades ago, when you think about abuse for boys, it wasn't taken as seriously as today. Even the boys, even the Menendez brothers' attorneys said if these were the Menendez sisters, they would not be sitting in jail right now. So when you have a new era, when people recognize that boys can be raped too, because there were statements back in the 90s that boys can't be raped. So it just goes to show the disconnect and possibly also what the jury heard and did not hear. During the first trials, the Menendez brothers were tried separately, and that was televised. You had the accounts and the evidence of sexual abuse. During that second trial that was not televised, a lot of that evidence was suppressed. So many wonder if the evidence of abuse were brought up in the trial, could that have resulted in a different outcome from the jury? And that is likely going to be key in the request by the DA to likely get a judge to sign off. And I'm going to toss it back to you, Hallie, because we're seeing some movement right now.
You're seeing it as well. The DA there walking in, George Gascon, talking with the family members, about to begin this news conference where we are set to find out whether, in fact, the Menendez brothers will be resentenced after, as you know, a great deal of attention on their case most recently. So we are going to have a lot more on this as NBC News begins its special report right now.
NBC News Special Report. Here's Lester Holt.
Good afternoon. We're coming on the air with breaking news about one of the most infamous murder cases in America, the Menendez brothers killings. Any moment now, we expect an announcement from Los Angeles District Attorney George Gascon about a possible recommendation to resentence the brothers. Lyle and Erik are currently serving life behind bars without parole for the 1989 murder of their parents, Kitty and Jose. The two were shot to death in their Beverly Hills mansion. The case has received fresh attention following a Peacock documentary and a new Netflix series, and after celebrities like Kim Kardashian and Rosie O'Donnell publicly supported the brothers' release. Earlier this month, the Menendez family pleaded for the release of the brothers, arguing new evidence backs their long-standing claim that they acted in self-defense after years of sexual abuse by their father, Jose, who was a high-powered music executive. Today's announcement could pave the way for Lyle and Erik, now 56 and 53, to be freed from their prison near San Diego. Let's go right now to L.A. District Attorney George Gascon, just starting his remarks.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. And before I begin speaking, I want to also introduce some other people that are here with me, and I hope I'm pronouncing the names right because I've seen handwritten part of it. But I have Ana Maria Barat, Jose Menendez, Jose Menendez and niece Karen Bender-Mollen, and Kitty's niece. They're all here with us. Also with us here is Brock Lunsford. He's the Assistant Head Deputy for the Post-Litigation Conviction Unit, and Nancy Cervier, who is the Deputy District Attorney in charge of the Resentencing Unit. Let me begin by telling you that this is a case where we've had many people in this office spend a great deal of time reviewing the case. I have to tell you unequivocally that we don't have a universal agreement. There are people in the office that strongly believe that the Menendez brothers should stay in prison the rest of their life, and they do not believe that they were molested. And there are people in the office that strongly believe that they should be released immediately and that they were in fact molested. I have to tell you that after very careful review of all the arguments that were made for people on both sides of this equation, I came to a place where I believe that under the law, resentencing is appropriate, and I am going to recommend that to a court tomorrow. What that means in this particular case is that we're going to recommend to the court that the life without the possibility of parole be removed and that they will be sentenced for murder, which, because there are 2 murders involved, that will be 50 years to life. However, because of their age, under the law, since they were under 26 years of age at the time that these crimes occurred, they will be eligible for parole immediately. The teams that have worked on this, on the resentencing side of it, have spent literally probably hundreds of hours by now looking at this case. These cases were originally presented on the habeas side of it, which I'll explain in a moment what that is, last year, and then the request for a prosecutor-initiated resentencing occurred earlier this year. And there have been people in this office working in these cases from the very beginning, as well as many other cases that we have. The reason why I'm here today and why I came in front of all of you about 10 days ago is because there was a more recent documentary about the case that again brought a tremendous amount of public attention. And we know there have been other documentaries, so this is not the first, this is a more recent one. And frankly, our office got flooded with requests for information. And even though this case was already scheduled to be heard in late November, I decided to move this forward because, quite frankly, we did not have enough resources to handle all the requests. And one of the things that I thrive to do in this office is to be very transparent in everything that we do. In this case, we review the prison files. And you have to understand that the way the process works, when you're talking about a resentencing under the law, it really focuses not necessarily on what the original crimes were, but it focuses on, has the person been rehabilitated, number one, and number two, can they be released safely into the community? Under that rubric, since I've been in office, we have resentenced over 300 people, including 28 for murder. Only 4 have reoffended. If that was a regular recidivism rate in this country, we would be the safest nation in the world, but we know that it's not. In fact, somewhere between 40 and 50% of the people that go to prison reoffend and get rearrested. And that's why we have so many problems. However, when you look at the case of the Menendez brothers, you see 2 very young people. One was 19 and the other was 21 when they committed these horrible acts. And I want to underline, they were horrible acts. There is no excuse for murder. And I will never imply that what we're doing here is to excuse that behavior. Because even if you get abused, the right path is to call the police, seek help. But I understand also how sometimes people get desperate. We often see women, for instance, that have been battered for years, and sometimes they will murder their abuser out of desperation. And I do believe that the brothers were subjected to a tremendous amount of dysfunction in the home and molestation. But they went to prison for life without the possibility of parole, which meant that certainly under the law at that time, they had no hopes of ever getting out. They could have done what many other people do, which is basically said, you know what, I'm here for the rest of my life. so I'm going to do whatever. I'm going to misbehave, I'm going to join gangs, I'm going to live the life of the person. But they never did that. To the contrary, even though they didn't think that they would ever be let free, they engaged in a different journey. A journey of redemption and a journey of rehabilitation. And often the people that begin their journey of rehabilitation and redemption in prison is often very internal. And what they do, and one of our lawyers pointed out this today, is usually the path is people try to further their education, do things for self-improvement, which the brothers have done, by the way. But it's more unique or less usual, I guess, when people not only do that, but they also begin to engage in ways to make life for others better. And in this case, the brothers have been doing so for a very long time, creating groups to deal with how to address untreated trauma, creating groups to deal with other inmates that have physical disabilities and may be treated differently. Even in one case, Lyle negotiating for other inmates as to the conditions that they live under during prison. And all this was done by two young people, now they're not as young, that had no hopes of ever getting out of prison. They have been in prison for nearly 35 years. I believe that they have paid their debt to society, and the system provides a vehicle for their case to be reviewed by a parole board, and if the parole concurs with my assessment, and it will be their decision, they will be released accordingly. I must underline, however, this case will be filed in court tomorrow. The final decision will be made by the judge. Court has to agree with my conclusion that they deserve to be resentenced. It is very possible that there may be members of this office that will be present in court opposing the resentencing. And they have a right to do so. And we encourage those that disagree with us to speak, and the court is the appropriate place to do it. We certainly feel we're very sure not only that the brothers have rehabilitated and that they will be safe to be reintegrated in our society, but that they have paid their dues, not only for the crimes that they committed, but because of all the other things they have done to improve the life of so many others. So, again, we will be filing for resentencing tomorrow. We're seeking that they would be sentenced to life with the possibility of parole, as opposed to life without the possibility of parole, which is they currently have. That means that they would have 50 years to life because there were two murders. But because of the age upon which they were convicted, under 26, under current law, that means they're eligible for youthful parole. I think there is also important to have some introspection today, because I think that often, for cultural reasons, we don't believe victims of sexual assault, whether they're women or whether they're men. We saw in our first trial, which, by the way, they were tried twice. The first trial hung, meaning the jury could not come to a conclusion, and in fact, about half of the jury wanted to convict them of manslaughter, which, if that were have been the case, they would have been off prison a long time ago. And then there was a second trial, and then they were convicted of murder with special circumstances, which led to the life without the possibility of parole. But it's salient to understand that our own implicit and sometimes explicit bias around sexual abuse and sexual assaults often leads us to severe injustices in our community. And I want to speak to those that are victims of sexual assault now, whether you're a man or a woman. Know that we're here for you. If you're a victim of sexual assault in this community, and by that we're talking about LA County, not just LA City, you can come for help. Whether you're prepared to prosecute or not, we will be here for you. We have services for you. And if you're prepared to move forward with the prosecution, we will evaluate it as we do any other case. And if we believe that the evidence is there to present a credible case in front of a jury that can be proven beyond a reasonable doubt, we would proceed accordingly. You do not have to suffer alone. You don't have to keep it to yourself. And help is here unconditionally. I'm going to say a few words in Spanish because I know there's tremendous amount of interest from the Spanish media, and I know that there are going to be other speakers today.
Los Angeles County District Attorney George Gascon making the announcement that the Menendez brothers, who killed their parents back in the late 80s, will be eligible for resentencing. He will essentially go to the court tomorrow and petition for the resentencing of the brothers, saying because of their age, Laura Jarrett, let me bring you into this, because of their age, they could be eligible to be released virtually immediately.
Yes, because of their age at the time of the murders, they were under 26 years old, just 21 and 18 at the time. That makes them eligible for parole. So let's talk about the reasons that were offered, which are really fascinating if you think about it, Lester. This is a district attorney who campaigned on reform, who has sort of been at the front tier of resentencing efforts like this, facing an enormous amount of pressure from the public, from celebrities to look at this case. And he's laying out the abuse that he says he believes that they suffered at the hands of their father, something that did not come in that second trial. It did come in the first, but not in the second trial. Also talking about the amount of time that they've been behind bars. Obviously, as you said, they were convicted in 1996, have been behind bars for more than 3 decades now. And those two factors leading him to advocating for them to be resentenced now. Under the law, you can be resentenced for what's known in the interests of justice. That's the standard. And one of the criteria is when somebody who is alleging a physical or sexual abuse, like in this case, was not allowed to present that evidence in the time of the original sentencing. And so that's part of the factors that Gascon is mentioning here, talking about how cultural norms on that issue have changed.
And Gascon said he's not making excuses for them, in fact, but he says they have paid their dues. That's his assessment of making this decision. I want to talk about something else we heard here. He was very clear that there is opposition within the DA's office as to whether this is a proper decision, and he suggested that we will see or hear from some of those people from his office when this case goes to the court tomorrow.
Yeah, so pretty interesting and frankly, interesting strategies to sort of get out ahead of what would likely be certain reporting by us and I'm sure other outlets who would be hearing from sources who would be saying there is dissension within the office on this, a split, if you will, about whether they should face resentencing. He said there are people in the office who do not believe that they were actually molested. There are people in the office who believe that they should get out today. And he's suggesting that Gascon suggesting that people might actually come and testify or at least present their arguments to the judge tomorrow or in the coming weeks about why they should not be resentenced. Obviously, he believes that they should be. He believes that they should not die in prison. But it would be interesting to hear from members of his office who are currently there if they do choose to actually go in front of the judge and make that case.
All right, let's go back out to Los Angeles where Gadi Schwartz is standing. Gadi, Laura mentioned the kind of pressure there has been on this case. This groundswell, really, in the wake of these documentaries and investigative reports. Can you describe some of that and how that played into what's just happened?
Yeah, Lester, big news. A lot of people who have been watching this very closely are also right now asking, Why now? The DA has had this alleged new evidence for over a year. So the question is it because of all the renewed attention from the new Netflix show and those documentaries that you mentioned, or is it because the election is right around the corner and the DA finds himself right now around 30 points behind in the polls, whatever the reason? So much really culminated last week when we saw the bulk of the Menendez family come together in support of Erik and Lyle Menendez and effectively say they believe the brothers had been the victims of horrific sexual abuse at the hands of their father, Jose Menendez, and they want them released from prison as soon as possible. Now, a quick timeline for those that are tuning in and are unfamiliar with the timeline of how we got here. In 1989, the two brothers shot and killed their parents in their Beverly Hills mansion, and prosecutors say that they were motivated by greed, as evidenced by a shopping spree and this lavish spending after the murders. But the defense claimed that the brothers had been victims of ongoing rape and molestation by their father and killed their parents in self-defense because they feared their parents would kill them to keep the molestation secret. Now, all of that resulted in a hung jury, but that was only the first trial. During the second trial, almost none of the allegations of rape or molestation were allowed to be introduced, and the brothers were convicted and given life without parole. Fast forward to today, Lester. Recently, that new Netflix show, along with the Peacock documentary and several other documentaries, have brought a lot of public scrutiny to the original case with a very different societal understanding now of sexual abuse. And there are also new allegations that Jose Menendez raped a 12-year-old member of the popular Latin band Menudo while he was president of RCA Records. And there's also this letter that's circulating from Erik to a cousin suggesting that the molestation was ongoing and that he still feared his father 8 months before the murders. Important to note that at least one uncle of the Menendez brothers does not want them released. He has filed an amicus briefing with the court, so we'll see how that plays out, as well as the possibility of members of the DA's office also arguing against the resentencing that we've heard of today.
All right, Gotti Schwartz in Los Angeles, and let me bring Laura back into this. So the way this was described by the DA, that this could almost lead to an immediate release, but it does go to a judge, and I would think this is not something they rush or take, you know, politely.
Right. So this is not happening in a vacuum, and it's not entirely up to the DA. Obviously, he gets to make the petition for resentencing, essentially a recommendation to the judge that he believes that they should not be behind bars. But the judge is going to look at this case objectively and decide whether or not that he agrees with that petition. If he does agree with that petition, and he already has a petition for their freedom pending before him, it's what's known as a habeas petition. They filed that more than a year ago. He already has that in front of him. But if the judge, now looking at this with the DA's recommendation, agrees that they should be resentenced, I should say, then it's still going to be up to the parole board, because as the district attorney laid out, they're eligible for parole. It doesn't mean they just walk out the day that the judge says so. It still has to go through the normal process.
Why is a new trial not on the table?
It's because of partly how they've structured this. If they had gone through a different route, which is a much more lengthy process and sort of a long shot process, if you will, that habeas route in front of the judge, then they could potentially be eligible for a new trial. But because they've gone through this resentencing route, which the district attorney said only 28 people have actually been resentenced under this new policy that's been in place since roughly 2021, thousands of petitions are pending. So this is not as if it comes up very often. And to Gotti's point, it raises the question of why now? Why did the Menendez brothers case get so much attention and allow this public pressure campaign that's happening just around the district attorney's reelection?
And Gotti, if I still have you, let me ask you about this new evidence that I guess has been discussed in some of these programs. Do we know if it is in fact new and it is compelling evidence that potentially moves the needle in the story?
Well, at this point, it's difficult to characterize it as evidence legally because it hasn't been introduced into court. A lot of it has been found by journalists. There was a journalist that discovered this letter that was allegedly written from Erik to one of his cousins, and that was found in drawers. Apparently, this journalist had asked, hey, can I go through some of the old stuff from back in the day? The family granted him access, and then he found this letter that seemed to suggest that molestation was going on 8 months before the killings happened. So that would need to be officially introduced into evidence, but that was provided to the DA's office quite some time ago. And then the second piece is an affidavit by a member of the band Menudo, who was 12 at the time, who said that he was raped by Jose Menendez when RCA Records was entering an agreement with the band Menudo. He has testified about that, and he entered an affidavit. Again, neither one of those things have officially been entered into the court of record here.
All right, Gotti Schwartz in Los Angeles. Laura, thank you to both. That concludes this NBC News special report. For more coverage, tune into our streaming channel, NBC News Now, and online at NBCnews.com. We'll have an interview with the DA coming up here on Nightly News. I'm Lester Holt. Thank you for watching, and good day.
I'm Hallie Jackson. We're picking up here on NBC News Now, taking you right back to Los Angeles, where as we speak, the Los Angeles District Attorney is answering questions about this process for the Menendez brothers. We're going to go back and listen in.
The decision was just made about an hour ago. Right, then it goes back to the prison system, and then the parole system takes over that. That's correct.
Would there be a parole or probationary period? Would they have to live in a halfway house, or simply be released if they're allowed to be released?
You know, those are really completely entirely up to the parole board. Place. Well, try.
What was the factor that made the final decision? You said the final decision was just made. Was it the letter? Was it the Menudo confession? What was it that put you over the top to make?
No, what it was is I was evaluating the arguments that were being made within my office, both pro and against the release.
DA, can I ask you?
Hold on, I had it.
Calls from people that
I'm, you have made resentencing a cornerstone of your tenure as district attorney here in Los Angeles. There are some people who have accused you of using this very, very highly publicized, clearly case to use it for politics, given how close we are to the election. What's your response to people who have been making that claim?
There's nothing political about this. We have resentenced over 300 people, including 28 for murder. And we will continue to resentence people in the future. And that's all I can tell you.
But DA, question. But
yes, sir. Excuse me, please. You're interrupting.
Everyone's interrupting. I'm just wondering how your bid for re-election.
Yes, please. Yes.
Could the brothers be home by Thanksgiving?
I don't know the answer to that.
Why did you decide not to go with the reduced voluntary manslaughter?
That was part of the process that I was still going through up until a couple hours ago. I don't believe that a manslaughter would have been the appropriate charge given the premeditation that was involved in the murders. I believe that these were clearly murders that were premeditated. Now, the motivation, that's where, differences of opinion come up, but I don't think it would be appropriate to go all the way down to manslaughter.
DA, yes, ma'am. Your bid for re-election
would you please stop? I am not going to talk about re-election, okay?
Okay. So
if you want to talk to re-election, go outside. We'll talk later. Please.
Relax.
It's a fair question.
No, it's not.
It is.
I'm sorry, you're interrupting, sir.
Be respectful.
Please.
¿Qué va a pasar mañana después de que presenten en la corte un documento?
Pues depende, como estaba explicando la abogada, la encargada de esta unidad, la corte probablemente va a señalar otro día donde los dos, la defensa y nosotros podemos ir y habrá una evaluación de la evidencia, si hay alguien que se opone a esta moción que estamos, este proceso que estamos iniciando, también la Corte va a poder oír todo eso y la Corte toma la decisión final.
Yes, ma'am. Announced the press conference before you made your decision?
Yes, because we're going to make a decision one way or the other. It's just a question what the decision was going to be.
Just giving you a timeline. If you are no longer in office, what happens to this case? Could a potential successor undo what you're about to file?
I don't think so. Once it's filed, it's filed. It's up to the court to take it from there.
You mentioned.
Yes, I'm sorry.
In a parole situation, obviously you've got a policy of not sending DEAs to those. Since you're obviously supporting the push for release here, how would that work with people from post-litigation? We send some big buildings from the parole court to argue for their release?
No. We have a policy that we only send victim services advocate if the victim or the victim's family wants that support. We don't send lawyers to our parole boards to relitigate a case. The parole board is fully aware of what the initial crime was, the crime that led to the conviction. Their work is primarily to evaluate whether they're rehabilitated and safe to be released, and that will be the way here.
Can you break down the timeline for us? Can we expect a hearing by the end of the year?
Nancy, we don't.
I'm hoping to get it on calendar, depending on the defense preparedness. I'd like to see it go to hearing probably within the next 30 to 45 days at the most. There's not much to argue.
Okay, there's one more question, please, but related to the case, not to elections. If you want to talk about elections, we'll do that. Yes, sir.
What would you like to say right now to Erik and Lyle Menendez?
What we like to say to them, and it's we, because it's not a, I've made the final decision, obviously, but we have a whole team that worked on it. We have a family here that wants to be reunited, is that we appreciate what they did while they were in prison. While I disapprove of the way they handle their abuse, we hope that they not only have learned, which appears that they have, but that if they get reintegrated into our community, that they continue to do public good. Thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. So you have been watching there the Los Angeles District Attorney George Gascon talk about the resentencing now for the Menendez brothers in this extraordinarily high-profile case and the process now ahead, noting that the family was not aware of the final decision until really today, because he said the final decision was only made about an hour ago. And despite his bid for re-election currently, he said there is nothing political about this. I want to bring back in now Dana Griffin, Gotti Schwartz, Angela Senadella as well. And Gotti, if we have you, I'd like to start there and your reaction to what we're just hearing now from the DA.
Yeah, so there's two different reactions that I've got. One to the news of the day, and then the other to him saying that this is not political. So let's just go with the news of the day first. That's George Gascon recommending that the Menendez brothers be resentenced for murder, meaning a maximum of 50 years to life in prison. That would make them automatically eligible for parole. Remember, they were convicted of first-degree murder, and at the time they were ineligible for parole. Very interesting that his resentencing request here is not for, manslaughter charges, which is what a lot of people were talking about before that. But then again, a lot of people that have been watching this unfold, they are asking, especially here in Los Angeles, the district attorney has had all of this new alleged evidence for well over a year now. So is the timing of all this because of the renewed attention from this new Netflix show, that Peacock documentary that just came out, several other new documentaries as well? Or is it because the election is right around the corner and the DA finds himself about 30 points behind in the polls? I'm sure you heard some of the questions there, things getting really testy with George Gascon. Yeah. George Gascon promising to answer questions about the politics, I guess, of all of that outside. But whatever is going on there, so much of this did culminate last week when we saw the bulk of the Menendez family all come together. Some of them speaking out against the way that they felt that the Menendez brothers were sexualized, in their words, or characterized in the Netflix show that came out, but all coming together in support of Erik and Lyle Menendez and effectively saying that they do believe that the brothers had been the victims of sexual abuse and rape at the hands of their father, and they want them released from prison as soon as possible. As for the timeline of what we're looking at now, we've heard conflicting reports there. We're hoping to get a little bit of clarity, but at this point, it seems like a big question mark as to when they may be released from prison. Hallie?
Well, Dan, I'll go to you in a second, but Angela, let me bring you in on that point. What should the expectation be?
Well, the expectation really depends on both the judge and then obviously that of the parole board. But I want to talk a little bit about how there's so much suspicion about his political motivations and how the election is right around the corner. And I totally understand that. But I'm going to say I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing if you look at the role of a district attorney in a society, and especially legally. Like, they are supposed to protect the safety of the people. They serve the community. They are an elected official. So if they feel there is a demand that the public is bringing that they can respond to in a manner that is effective and in line with their political goals, that might be okay. I think the problem comes when, if, for example, in the documentaries, there was evidence that was wrong or there was issues that aren't really factual, and then the public is moving in a way that is not based in factual knowledge, then that can cause a problem. But if the DA is acting in a way that responds to the needs of the people, I think that's okay, Hallie.
Angela, thank you. Dana, let me go to you, because in the room we saw some brief comments just beforehand from the DA to the Menendez family members who were in the room there. As Gotti notes, they have spoken publicly about this. There was that news conference just last week where they talked about how if this case had unfolded now, they believe that there would be a different outcome here for these brothers.
Yeah, and you heard the DA say just a bit there that there is a family that wants to be reunited. He did note that these were two murders, two premeditated murders. Therefore, he disapproves of how they handled their abuse, but he believes that they have been rehabilitated. He said earlier in the press release that even though they never thought that they would be released, they've been on this journey toward redemption and rehabilitation. And he said, quote, "I believe they have paid their debt to society. Now it's up to the judge to possibly agree, and then the parole board to decide if they are eligible for parole and if they should get out." And Hallie, that's going to be another media storm.
Dana, thanks. Gotti, I want to sneak you in here. I know you had some thoughts too.
Yeah, very quick, a very important point. There is one uncle, a member of the Menendez family, an uncle of the Menendez brothers, that says that he does not want them released. He believes that Kitty and Jose Menendez were killed in cold blood, that this was premeditated, and he does not agree with the rest of the family that has expressed their support of the brothers. And then we heard this remarkable comment from Gascon, basically saying that there are people in his office that may be arguing when they go to court, when the district attorney recommends resentencing, members of his own district attorney office that may also be presenting to the judge opposing that view and trying for those brothers to serve out their rest of their lives because they do not believe that they were molested, and they believe that these killings were premeditated, and the jury got it right the second time. Hallie?
Gotti Schwartz, thank you very much. Dana Griffin, our thanks to you there in LA as well, and our legal analyst, Angela Senadella. We really appreciate it as we've been covering this breaking news here over the course of the last 40 minutes here on NBC News Now. Coming up, we've got a lot more to get to, including the other headlines of the day from the campaign trail, with the stars coming out in force for the 2024 candidate. The impact that some of these big names could have, yes, like Beyonce, in some of those critical battleground states. To the campaign trail now, where former President Trump and Vice President Harris are both taking some big battleground swings with just 12 days to go. Both breaking out the star power they think their bases want to see. Want to show you a live look. This is Mr. Trump at that Arizona rally now, a state where we're tracking 2 arrests related to the election, as he's bringing out some familiar faces to conservatives, set to appear with Charlie Kirk, Vivek Ramaswamy, Tulsi Gabbard, who was with Mr. Trump down in Georgia, along with those you see on the other side of your screen there, Tucker Carlson and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Our team's traveling with both candidates tonight, and I want to start with Garrett Haake in Arizona, where, of course, Mr. Trump is speaking. We're tracking these 2 election-related arrests there, one related to somebody who allegedly shot at a Democratic campaign office, another related to a fire that burned ballots at a mailbox in Phoenix, right?
Yeah, let's start with that campaign office, because that seems to be the more serious episode here. In this case, a 60-year-old man was arrested after several incidents of shooting at Democratic campaign offices. When police searched his home, they found 120 guns, something like 250,000 rounds of ammunition, and a grenade launcher. Apparently, this person was planning some kind of mass casualty act. That's according to local law enforcement. We're going to continue to watch that case. This ballot burning case is another matter. We're getting a little bit of contradictory information from the Arizona Secretary of State's office, but it does appear some number of ballots were destroyed by an act of arson at a ballot drop box here in Arizona, a small fire. Hallie, we don't know much about this yet, but obviously it's the kind of thing people here are watching very closely, and we're told by the Secretary of State's office they believe they'll be able to identify everyone whose ballot was damaged, make sure those folks get a chance to vote.
I mean, I see we've got the split screen here, right? The former president speaking behind you. You are there at the rally. He continues to be sort of escalating his rhetoric now, really ratcheting that up against Vice President Harris, which may not be the closing argument that his campaign wants him to make, especially with voters saying that they really care about the economy, the inflation, cost of living, the border.
Yeah, look, I think it's part of the argument, and I'm checking my phone here because I just want to add some of the new language he was using, talking about immigration, describing America as a dumping ground, a garbage can for the world. That's sort of part of the argument that his campaign wants him to be making. They do want him to be talking about immigration and talking to the folks here at this rally. That is a core part of his message, and it's something Trump himself has said over and over again he believes will be the most decisive issue in this election. Now, the polls don't support that. They place it below some other issues like cost of living and like abortion, depending on who you talk to. But Trump's going to do what Trump's going to do, and that also includes trying to, attack Kamala Harris in every way he can. Hallie, I'm constantly reminded of something a senior Trump campaign advisor told me right after Harris replaced Biden in the race and was at the time much more popular than Biden had been. He said, look, by the end of this race, nobody's going to be popular. And I think you're seeing that, frankly, from both campaigns right now, a very aggressive effort to take the bark off the other side.
Garrett Haake, live for us in Arizona. Thank you. Let me get to Aaron Gilchrist now, who's on the campaign trail in a different critical battleground, and that is Georgia. Because Aaron, the vice president, is breaking out her own star power tomorrow, right? We showed Beyonce in the tease before the break. It really is happening this time. It's not like the DNC, right, where she was maybe going to show up, maybe not. Like, she's really going to be there tomorrow night. As tonight, the vice president's got Bruce Springsteen, Tyler Perry, Spike Lee, Samuel L. Jackson, too.
Yeah, several officials with the campaign have told us that Beyonce will be in Houston tomorrow night and that she will perform there as well. I have to note, though, for you, Hallie, that Samuel L. Jackson just took the stage behind us here in Clarkston, Georgia, just outside Atlanta. He is among the folks, the star power that you referenced there, who will be joining Vice President Harris here in the Atlanta area tonight. She just arrived, we believe, in the vicinity of the stadium we're standing in right now, as this crowd here has really grown tremendously over the course of the last couple of hours. And the vice president at this point, with this rally and with others that we will see like it over the next several days, is really trying to get out the vote. That's the primary focus of this event here tonight. Obviously, we've seen months of the vice president trying to get her message out, trying to let people know what she's about, what she wants to do if she wins the election in November, trying to build that enthusiasm as the campaign has talked about so often over the last several months. And now the effort is to turn that enthusiasm into action by way of voting. There are several states, many states, including battleground states, that are already engaged in early voting, whether it's in person or by mail. And so the vice president today, along with former President Obama, with whom she's appearing for the first time, are going to be trying to get people to do that, to get out to vote. I want you to hear a little bit of what the vice president had to say earlier today about having people like Barack Obama and Bruce Springsteen in her corner.
I think it just shows the breadth and depth of the support that we have, and also the enthusiasm that a lot of people are bringing to the campaign and feel about our campaign.
And then, of course, there is the Beyonce factor, Hallie. Of course, all the people who are here supporting the vice president today are going to have to get information behind Beyonce, who will be the headliner for days to come, bringing her influence over a really diverse group of people, male, female, black, white, all the things in between. Age is not a factor in terms of who's in the beehive, so you'll see that star power on stage tomorrow in Houston, Texas.
I assume you are Aaron Gilchrist, with your quoting, of course, of the Queen Bee's lyrics.
I'm glad you caught that, yeah.
All right, Aaron Gilchrist, thank you very much. Hope you have fun in Houston tomorrow. We got a lot more to get to tonight, including some new details now on that breaking news we brought you from overseas yesterday. How many North Korean troops are helping Russia, why it's such a risky relationship, and what Putin himself is now saying about it. Tonight, Russian President Vladimir Putin is not denying the presence of North Korean troops in Russia right now. Here's what he told our Keir Simmons today.
The actions of Russia have not escalated things in the Ukraine, but the U.S. have certainly done that. They've even publicly declared how much money they're pouring into it. We have to have further negotiations with North Korea. We'll see how that goes.
It comes as South Korean officials say they expect Kim Jong-un to send 12,000 troops to Russia. The U.S. says it has evidence that 3,000 are already there getting trained up, but there's still a whole bunch of questions like where these troops are going, what exactly they will be doing. Keir Simmons is joining us now. And Keir, tell us more about this moment here. You pressing Putin on this influx of North Korean troops, and what it all says about the state of the war in Ukraine now from Russia's perspective.
Yeah, it was the first time that President Putin commented on these allegations from the U.S., from South Korea, that there are North Korean troops now here in Russia. Now, he trolled us a little bit initially because I asked him about satellite images that are said to show North Korean troops here in Russia. You know, he kind of did that Putin thing of joking about it, of being sarcastic about it. But then that answer that you played there, and he also talked about a comprehensive strategic agreement between Russia and North Korea that was signed this year that includes a clause, and he mentioned it specifically, that calls on North Korea to support Russia in a conflict and vice versa. And I think that's just one example. You asked about the implications. That's just one example of where this can get really escalatory, is that if you think about it, and we know this is not something that's on the cards, obviously, but just in terms of the implications, if North Korea ended up in a war with South Korea, would Russia have to support North Korea? Effectively, what's happening is that the Ukraine war is being extended all the way to Asia, and that has many, many world leaders worried.
Talk about that, right? The fact that this is having a ripple effect all the way, of course, to the Korean Peninsula, especially when it comes to South Korea and their concerns about this moment.
Yeah, they're concerned, and they called the Russian ambassador in, and they're calling for the North Korean troops to be taken back. Now, I mean, listen, we should just say, we mentioned it last night, Hallie, that the U.S. doesn't know what these North Korean troops are going to be used for. There's clearly, you can read between the lines, intelligence suggesting they are going to end up in some kind of combat role with Ukrainian forces. But in a sense, I think from the answer we got today from President Putin, Russia kind of reserves the right to not have that happen. And once again, in another sense, it's just another threat, isn't it, from President Putin? It's another way of ratcheting things up. Just think about it from Ukraine's perspective, too. I mean, Korea has a 1 million-strong army. Now, we're talking about thousands of troops right now, but the message to the Ukrainians is, from the Russians, is we've got enough support that we can keep this going for as long as you can. So it does have ripple effects. Another one might be what other countries might be thinking right now. Well, we'll send some soldiers into this conflict on whichever side, and what implications could that have?
Keir Simmons, live for us there in Russia. Keir, we're glad to have you with us, as always, tonight. Thank you. So that decision to send troops to Russia has ripple effects, as Keir said, in Asia, including in China, with Beijing saying it's not aware of the situation, quote unquote, the situation, and reiterating China's hope for some kind of peaceful settlement of the war. But China supports Russia, right? So that's an extra layer of complication to the already complicated U.S.-China relationship, with the Treasury Department recently announcing new sanctions on 2 Chinese companies accused of directly helping Russia build drones to be used in that invasion of Ukraine. Our Janice Mackey-Freyer just sat down with the U.S. ambassador to China. She's joining us now from Beijing. Congratulations on that interview, Janice. Talk us through what you heard about the status, right, of the relationship now between the U.S. and China, China's support of Russia. Walk us through the headlines.
Well, Nicholas Burns, the U.S. ambassador here, didn't hesitate to openly criticize China for its support of Russia. He told me it's troubling that China will say that it's neutral in the war in Ukraine, but that its actions show the opposite, with protection for Russia diplomatically, economically, strategically. And the U.S. says hundreds of Chinese companies here are exporting so-called dual-use goods to the Russian defense industrial base. Now with North Korea, another China ally, potentially escalating the war, Beijing could face even more pressure from the U.S. and the West. China is already a competitive threat and a strategic rival for the U.S., he says, and he makes no apology for U.S. policy. Here's what he had to say.
Do you think the policy is too hawkish on China?
I think our policy is right. We have to compete. Whether you call it hawkish or not, we have to be clear-eyed by the dangers and the threat that the People's Republic of China poses to the United States, to our national security, whether it's in the Taiwan Strait or the South China Sea whether it's on China's support for Russia. So it's a complicated relationship. It's a very challenging relationship, but it's without any question the most consequential relationship that we Americans have with any other country in the world.
Ambassador Burns also criticized China for overcapacity, saying some goods are being produced at 2 or 3 times domestic demand, with an eye on dumping the excess on the global market. We're talking about EVs, lithium batteries, solar panels. He says that the risk of China Shock 2.0 is a, quote, genuine threat. Hallie?
So interesting, Janice. I have to tell you, back here in Washington, you know where my head is at, and that is in the election that is just now 12 days away, of course, between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. Give us sort of the vibe check from where you're standing in Beijing about what November 6th may look like here in the U.S.
Well, it's the one issue that Democrats and Republicans can agree on, right? That China is this threat to the U.S. and being tough on China is always part of the election cycle. Look, Beijing is not going to say anything about the election to avoid being accused of interfering, but China's leadership is watching this so closely. The U.S.-China relationship is fragile right now. It's been a lot worse. There have been some improvements. There are official talks now resuming on some levels, but where there's a real disconnect, Hallie, is at the people-to-people level, the level that China's President Xi Jinping is held up as this real arena for cooperation. And this is where Ambassador Burns called out China. Listen to this.
We do find a willingness to cooperate in some areas, but I'll give you an example where it's not happening. On 94 separate occasions in the last 11 months since the San Francisco summit last autumn, the government of China, the security services, have acted to actually impede our efforts here in our embassy in Beijing, in our consulates in China, to carry on basic programs trying to bring Chinese and American people together in a variety of ways. Seminars, concerts, just meetings to discuss one issue or another. These are not official meetings between government officials, but between citizens of both of our countries. So, you really they can't have it both ways. You can't say you want to promote people-to-people contacts and then try to actively impede them.
Hallie, when he talks about impeding, he had a grocery list of examples, harassing people, going to meetings, to shows, in one case, even cutting the electricity to an embassy event. And that in itself is revealing of the tripwires here. Remember, China broke off all communications after the balloon incident in February 2023. And the militaries just started talking again last month. Nuclear talks were called off recently as a protest over U.S. arms sales to Taiwan. So the diplomatic lines between these two countries are so few these days, and China has shown how easily they can be cut. Hallie?
Janice Mackey-Ferrer, thank you very much for that. Really fascinating stuff. Appreciate it, live from Beijing. That does it for us for this hour. We've got a lot more coverage picking up right now. We're coming on the air with that bombshell news, an illegal saga that's captivated the world for decades. A chance at freedom for the Menendez brothers after the L.A. district attorney just recommended they be resentenced for killing their parents 30 years ago. You watch that unfold live right here on NBC News Now as breaking news. But this whole thing is far from over. We're going to talk about the roadblocks still in place as the brothers try to fight their way out from behind bars. Plus, the stars, political and otherwise, coming out in force for those 2024 candidates. We'll tell you the effect some big names like, yes, Beyonce could have in some of those key battleground states. And the FDA zeroing in on maybe the culprit for that McDonald's E. coli outbreak. The onions at the center of it all as the legal fallout for Mickey D's grows. Then it's back to the negotiating table for Boeing and thousands of its employees. Why that surprise rejection of a new deal is having a ripple effect well beyond the aerospace company. We'll tell you why it could affect your summer trip next year. And the new accusations against the WWE just filed, how the lawsuits claim the McMahons did nothing to prevent the sexual abuse of so-called ring boys. Coming up a little bit later in the show. Hey there, I'm Hallie, and in just the last half hour, we saw that bombshell move by the LA DA. He's now asking for the Menendez brothers, who are serving life in prison for killing their parents, to be resentenced, to be eligible for parole in this landmark case that has really captivated the country and in some instances, people around the world. It's a big deal. All right, today's move by the DA brings these brothers one step closer, maybe, to walking free one day, although it'll still be up to a judge to ultimately decide. Watch this.
They have been in prison for nearly 35 years. I believe that they have paid their debt to society.
The brothers say they killed their parents more than 30 years ago because their father was sexually molesting them, and they were afraid their parents would kill them so no one would find out about the abuse. Their initial trials were broadcast minute by minute back in the early 90s. You're seeing some of that footage, really putting networks like Court TV on the map and dividing the country over whether these brothers were cold-blooded killers or whether they were victims of abuse justified in what they did. And it is TV again that has brought their case back into the spotlight. After Netflix released a drama series about the brothers, they also put out that separate doc on them, too. Angela Senadella is covering the legal angle for us, but I want to start with Dana Griffin, who is out for us live in Los Angeles. Walk us through it, right? Because it's been a dramatic 90 minutes of developments here.
Oh, yeah. So essentially, the DA is recommending that they be resentenced for murder, which allows them to be eligible for parole. Because of their ages, they were under 26. This means that they could possibly be released immediately if a parole board decides that. But this first has to go to a judge. A judge has to agree with the DA's recommendation, and then that's when the process of possibly being released will start. Now, during this press conference that the DA just held moments ago, he brought up a statement saying that not everyone in his office agrees, and that we will likely hear from some of those people during the case when this goes to a hearing, and likely you'll hear some of that opposition within his own office. But he says that he believes these brothers have paid their debt to society. He also said that he does not agree with the way that they went about dealing with their abuse, because he says these are two murders still, two premeditated murders, and that's why he did not go for manslaughter, which a lot of people speculated he would go for, but instead murder, which allows them to at least not die in prison. And essentially, Hallie, this is where we are now.
Yeah. These brothers have been in prison for decades. A lot of their family members have been fighting for a long time to try to get them out, what they call justice here. Yeah. But it's not unanimous. We should make clear it is not as though the Menendez brothers' relatives unanimously agree with this possible resentencing.
Absolutely. And one of them is an uncle of the brothers. He put out a statement through his attorney that reads in part, despite numerous requests, Gascon, the DA, has refused to inform Mr. Anderson. This is the 90-year-old brother of Kitty Menendez, the victim here. His name is Milton Anderson. They say any of the decisions before holding, he's refused to inform Anderson of any of the decisions before holding press conferences. He also went on to say that the DA has ignored multiple notifications about individuals coming forward with information that seriously questions the credibility of the so-called new evidence in this case. He says that Gascon has shown no interest in reviewing or investigating this evidence, turning a blind eye to potential flaws in his pursuit to rewrite history. And obviously, you've got some people just within the DA's office that are not on board with this. And I think that this is going to play out in the court system, and we will likely see maybe some of that dissension between some of the people that work in that office. But a lot of people are pointing to a tale of two different times, right? These boys allege that they were molested. There's been evidence that they have likely been molested. There's been new evidence of a letter and also an affidavit from another child who says that Jose Menendez sexually assaulted him. So this is all going to come into perspective. And had this been a different time, would these brothers have been convicted the same way if this information was released back in the 90s? Hallie?
Dana Griffin, live for us in L.A. Thank you. Angela Senadella, let me bring you in now for some of the legal analysis, right? Because as Dana made clear, as the DA made clear, this isn't the final step, right? There are still a couple of things that have to happen before the Menendez brothers could maybe ultimately walk free. Talk us through that, because the DA's request is also not insignificant, like it carries some weight here.
Yeah, so the DA's request generally carries an enormous amount of weight. So in this case, look, the DA and the defendant's lawyers would be going to the judge together and saying, we both agree. When both parties like that agree, usually the judge then would approve with whatever they've agreed with. Now, this case is so unusual with what Dana pointed out, the fact that there is dissension in the ranks and that he was so public about it. So let me tell you what he was doing with that press conference and bringing that up. He was essentially hedging. He was saying, look, this is what I believe. This is is what I'm going to try for, but I can't guarantee the outcome. And that is unusual because usually a DA in a case like this could guarantee the outcome by presenting to the judge that he believes there's full rehabilitation and there's no threat to public safety. So the dissension part is most fascinating. What happens next is they'll go in front of the judge, and then if the judge does rubber stamp this, does approve, then the parole board would consider whether or not they should be released on parole, in which case it could happen immediately, Hallie.
The brothers' attorneys had filed a petition for unlawful detainment last year, a petition that included some new evidence, which was a letter that Erik Menendez sent to his cousin back in the late 80s that corroborated claims of abuse. Now, new evidence is not required for resentencing, right? So what goes into this decision-making in the DA? How does George Gascon here decide what's in the interest of justice?
Right, so that had to do with a separate petition asking the court to just basically overturn the conviction entirely. Now, resentencing is something that the DA can just decide is relevant to public safety. So saying these people are rehabilitated, there were extenuating circumstances why this crime happened, but not saying the entire conviction should be vacated, which is what the defense really wanted.
Angela Senadella, thank you very much for that. A lot moving pieces on that for sure. Appreciate it. Let's take you back to the campaign trail now, where former President Trump is making a big battleground push in the Sun Belt. He's rallying right now in Arizona, a state that's seen 2 election-related arrests in just the last 24 hours. This is a live look, by the way. One of those arrests was related to a fire at a mailbox in Phoenix that had ballots in it. A couple of them were damaged, with the Arizona Secretary of State saying it could have been worse. No word on a motive, but there has been a suspect arrested. Now, the other arrest was related to 3 separate shootings at a Democratic office used by the Harris campaign. The suspect allegedly planned to carry out some kind of mass casualty event. He had more than 100 guns, police say, and like 250,000 rounds of ammo. He faces 3 charges, including terrorism. We are watching that, of course, as Mr. Trump is in the state for this campaign event, bringing out some familiar faces among conservatives for his campaign's final days. Charlie Kirk, Vivek Ramaswamy, Tulsi Gabbard. She was with him as well in Georgia, along with Tucker Carlson and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. You see him all right there. David Noriega is in Las Vegas ahead of the former president's rally there in Nevada. So why is it? Like, talk about this idea of political star power here. These are big conservative names, Tucker Carlson among them here, who are coming out to act as surrogates, essentially, even if they're not, let's say, household names, like, for example, Charlie Kirk to most of the rest of America.
Yeah, so there's a couple of different things that campaigns try to do in this home stretch. The first is reach that last final tiny sliver of persuadable or unreached voters. But the other, which is just as important, and I think some people would say arguably more important, is boosting enthusiasm and critically turnout in the base. Those already committed voters who, for whatever reason, may or may not actually come out on Tuesday, November 5th. These rallies that the president has been holding, where he's his truly most kind of uninhibited self, throwing as much red meat to the base as he possibly can, hosting and, you know, platforming these people like Charlie Kirk, Vivek Ramaswamy, etc. Those are really meant to speak to people who already like his message. He's not trying to persuade anybody with these rallies. He's just trying to energize the base. That's what we've seen in the last few events that he's held. That's what I'm expecting to see tonight in Las Vegas. This is different from a smaller event like a roundtable targeting something like, I don't know, Latino small business owners. It's just an example of the last Trump event that I came to in Las Vegas, which was much more restrained, much more targeted towards a persuadable audience. What we're going to see here tonight and what we're seeing in Tempe currently is, again, just a lot more about juicing that enthusiasm, that energy, that, and ultimately that turnout. Hallie?
What about this issue of young voters, David, especially young men? Talk us through that.
Yeah, so look, there's a few key demographics which are illustrated pretty well by Nevada and Clark County, specifically where I am now, that have historically been part of the Democratic coalition, but where there's been some erosion in their support for Democrats, and Trump has gained some ground. That includes Latino voters, black voters, and young voters, particularly young men. Now, the gamble for the Trump campaign there is that these young men are also among the lowest propensity voters. So even if a young man tells a pollster or a reporter that they're going to go out and vote for Trump, it's not at all guaranteed that they actually will, you know, go out and cast that ballot on Tuesday, November 5th. Now, Trump is still also, by the way, not winning the youth vote generally. There's a recent NBC poll that shows, you know, Harris with a substantially higher approval rating than Trump among young voters. 42% for Harris, 30% for Trump, 37% negative for Harris against 53% for Donald Trump. You know, we actually ran into a young voter, an 18-year-old UNLV student outside the rally today. He wasn't coming to the rally. He was just on his way to class, but we figured we'd stop him and talk to him. He is that sort of unicorn, undecided young male voter that either campaign could still potentially reach. But critically, and this is what I found out talking to him, Hallie, at this late stage, undecided voters are for the most part pretty disengaged. They just don't pay that much attention. And so they're gold for the campaigns, but it's pretty hard gold to acquire. I want to play you a little bit of what he told me when I was kind of quizzing him, telling him, you know, you are very important to these campaigns. What do you actually think of these candidates? Take a listen to what he said. Is there anything that you don't like about Donald Trump?
He's not the smartest guy ever, I'll admit that. I'm gonna be sure. He said some stupid things, and that's not reassuring, but yeah.
So, and tell me about Harris. What do you like or not like about her? Do you have an opinion about her? Do you know much about her?
Not a whole ton about her. I don't know, I'm still thinking about it.
That is the undecided voter of today, Hallie. For what it's worth, he told me that he's leaning Trump, but again, far from guaranteed that a person like that will actually go out and vote November 5th. Hallie?
David Noriega, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Good to see you. Let's talk about Vice President Harris now, because she is set to appear tonight at a rally in Georgia with former President Obama as we talk about political star power. He's one of the most popular figures in the Democratic Party. And it's the first time she's going to be standing alongside him on the campaign trail, standing side by side at that event in Georgia. And he's not going to be the only one at this rally. We talked about political star power. How about just like regular human being rock star power, right? Bruce Springsteen, Tyler Perry, he runs his whole media empire out of Atlanta. Spike Lee, Samuel L. Jackson. If you watched last hour, you saw Sam Jackson taking the stage there behind Aaron Gilchrist. The biggest name, however, that comes tomorrow. Do I have to say it? If you have eyeballs, you know who she is. Yes, that is Beyonce. For real this time. This isn't like the DNC. She really is going to show up. And she's apparently going to perform, according to one source familiar with those plans. Peter Alexander is in Clarkston, Georgia for us tonight. But are you going to Houston, Peter? That's all we want to know. Who's covering the Beyonce concert for Vice President Harris?
Yeah, I pulled that long straw, as it were, so I'll be in Houston tomorrow to see Beyonce, of course. I think a lot of the folks who are going to be supporting Kamala Harris are also hoping that Beyonce is performing when she's with her side-by-side yesterday. As you know, we've seen Samuel L. Jackson, Spike Lee already taking the stage. We're now hearing from the two senators from this state of Georgia, John Ossoff, Raphael Warnock, coming up next. But, you know, the reason that they're here in particular is notable because this is one of the largest black communities, DeKalb County, just outside of Fulton County, where most of Atlanta is in this state right now. And it's an indication, according to people on the ground here, that there is some concern right now about turnout among black voters, a community with whom the Democrats, Kamala Harris, needs to really see a surge in the vote right now. Particularly the concern is associated with whether black men are coming out in the same numbers. They've seen some slippage among those black men. The recent poll from the Pew Research Group shows, among other things, that there is about a 77% advantage for Kamala Harris over Donald Trump when it comes to black women, but only a 58% or so advantage when it comes to black men. So that is a big gap, a place where they're hoping to catch up over the course of the next several days. This, where we are, Clarkston, Georgia, significant, one of the largest refugee settlement communities in the state as well here. Many persons of color, and they're hoping that they can energize this diverse community in these waiting days before Tuesday, November 5th.
We also have been talking, Peter, over the course of the last maybe 48 hours or so about this idea of fascism. And former Chief of Staff to Donald Trump, John Kelly, you know, the general, calling Donald Trump a fascist. Vice President Harris agreed with that. I want to play a little bit of what she said before she left for Atlanta, where she, again, this is her closing argument, right? She is hammering this, and she did it right before she got on the plane. Here it is.
Either you have the choice of a Donald Trump who will sit in the Oval Office, stewing, plotting revenge, retribution, writing out his enemies list, or what I will be doing, which is responding to folks like the folks last night with a to-do list.
So, Peter, talk to us about this strategy as you hear it from your sources on this closing argument. It seems really intended to reach, like, disaffected Republicans.
You know, I think that's exactly right. We're starting to hear that particular language that she's zeroing in on, what the argument she's making here, which is in effect that Donald Trump is focused on an enemies list. She is focused on a to-do list, trying to cast the contrast here, as she did again at that town hall with CNN last night, did in her remarks today when she was speaking before coming here to Atlanta, to sort of demonstrate that there are two very different visions for the future of this country. It's similar to a speech we expect her to deliver in the terms of a closing argument address that she'll make at what is called the Ellipse in Washington, D.C. Notably, that speech is coming at the same location where Donald Trump gave his remarks on January 6th, only a short time before the Capitol attack. So there can be more than one closing argument message. This is certainly among them, though, that idea, in her words, that he is unhinged and basically that he wants unchecked power, hoping that really resonates with some undecideds, but also with some of those Republicans who may not be inclined to vote for Donald Trump, some of those Nikki Haley supporters, where they break in the final weeks here. Hallie.
Peter Alexander live for us there in Clarkston, Georgia. Peter, thank you. Tonight, let's talk about some of those really fast-moving developments to that whole McDonald's E. coli situation, that deadly outbreak there, with FDA officials and McDonald's confirming that they're looking at Taylor Farms. This is one of the chain's onion suppliers as the potential source of this whole thing. McDonald's is now telling all of its franchises, destroy any cases of yellow onions, stop using them, obviously, of certain batches supplied by Taylor, in an outbreak that has made nearly 50 people sick across 10 states and, of course, has killed one person. There's some really serious fallout from this for McDonald's, include the filing of at least 15 different lawsuits by people who say they were affected by the outbreak. One of them telling us how getting sick shook her trust in eating out at fast food restaurants anywhere. Watch.
You get the physical damage. I'd say there's also emotional damage. I haven't really eaten out since then. It's still just as scary to know that that could happen when we kind of put our faith into like the fast food industry to keep us safe, like food-wise.
NBC's Maura Barrett is following this one for us. So, Maura, what have we heard from Taylor Farms? Because they say they haven't found the traces of E. coli in the recalled onion. So what's the, like, where's this coming from, basically?
So it started out, Hallie, as a voluntary recall out of an abundance of caution. But literally just seconds ago, before I came on with you, the FDA issued an update, and they're saying that they can confirm that yellow onions were sold to additional food service customers. Customers who received recalled onions have been directly notified of the recall, the FDA says. And so that's really important because literally until seconds ago, we knew that these restaurants that you're seeing on their screens, Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, KFC, Illegal Pete's, it's a regional burrito chain in that region, had voluntarily recalled because they wanted to be very cautious for their customers. None of them have tied any E. coli infections or any similar outbreaks to those restaurants, but it's something important to know now that we know that these onions are specifically tied and could have been distributed elsewhere. I think the other thing that we want to point out is that we did confirm with McDonald's that Taylor Farms is their supplier of onions that they removed from the menu. So it seems like all signals are pointing to these onions, the way the FDA is explaining it. And that's something that is really important for any customers. In terms of any ongoing danger, I do want to remind you of the conversation we had with the CDC chief of outbreak prevention yesterday, who said that we will likely see an uptick in numbers of infections, but that all of that probably happened. Those people probably got sick before these products were removed from various menus, Hallie.
We talked about those lawsuits, too. They're really piling up against McDonald's, and that happened very quickly just in the last couple of days since we found out about this outbreak, even though there's obviously a lot of other players involved. Explain that for us.
Right. So we anticipated multiple lawsuits to come. There's officially been 2 filed. We spoke with one lawyer who said he's representing at least 15 people affected by this E. coli outbreak tied to McDonald's. I want to read you some of the language from the lawsuit that has been filed. They lay out that the defendant, that's McDonald's, is therefore strictly liable for manufacturing, distributing, and marketing defective and unreasonably dangerous products and introducing them into the stream of commerce. We were able to interview the lawyer that's representing all of these people. I want you to hear some of that interview to lay out how he's thinking.
We as consumers in the United States place a tremendous amount of trust in the restaurants that we go to. You are trusting that the restaurant did everything they could do to make you safe. But in this case, McDonald's breached that trust, and I suspect it's going to take a long time before they get it back.
And I think the really interesting nugget to point out here, Hallie, that this is the first time onions have been tied to an E. coli outbreak like this.
Maura Barrett, thank you very much for staying on top of this one. I know, as you have been doing all week long. Appreciate it. There's some new fallout tonight after Boeing workers voted down a deal for a new contract, with that surprise rejection now creating ripple effects for Boeing, for other airlines, maybe even for summer travel next year. That's because with production stopped, Boeing's behind on delivering new planes to airlines. Problem is, those airlines have already factored new planes into their schedules for next spring and summer. And Spirit Airlines, which is already set to furlough workers at the end of the month, is now warning of potential layoffs if Boeing's strike keeps up. A strike that's costing Boeing nearly $1 billion a month. Tom Costello is joining us now. Hey, Tom.
Hallie, yeah. So Boeing says it is very disappointed that its workers have again rejected the latest contract offer. And so 33,000 workers remain walking the picket line. And that means that the Boeing assembly lines on the 737, the 67, and the 777 are all stalled. No planes rolling off the assembly line. And airlines are complaining because they're not getting the planes that they ordered, which means they're going to start having trouble flying the routes that they have promised on their schedules, probably in the spring and even in the summer at this rate. Bottom line, for the workers who are saying no to the contract offer, they want their pensions back. It was 10 years ago that Boeing stripped the pensions from their workers as part of a cost-saving move. And so now the workers are saying, we're not coming back to work if we don't get our pensions back. They also want a 40% pay hike, not the 35% that Boeing offered. Boeing has also offered increased contributions to the 401ks that employees have, and more bonuses and more incentives. Not good enough, according to the workers. And the bottom line is, in a year of big labor wins, it's the union that seems to have the leverage right now, because Boeing can't roll planes off the assembly line. It cannot fire all of these workers because it needs their expertise. It can't train new people to come in and take the jobs if it's already let go of all the people who would do the training. So it is the workers right now who have the leverage, and they're insisting they're not coming back to work yet. The question will be, will money make the difference if Boeing offers even more of a signing bonus or even more money to the 401ks? In the meantime, as you know, it's been a terrible year for Boeing, multiple years for Boeing. Those two overseas crashes that killed 346 people, the door plug blowout in January, multiple federal and congressional investigations. Over the summer, Boeing pleaded guilty to a federal fraud charge, a felony. And now, as you know, they reported a quarterly loss of $6 billion yesterday. Their stock's down more than 40%. And there is open speculation on the bond market that their bonds could be downgraded to junk status. So this is an American icon, a company that has been driving economic growth in this country and among, if not the biggest exporter. And now it is on its knees with its workers saying they're not coming back to work if they don't get even more money. Hallie?
Tom Costello, thank you very much for that. New concerns now about the possibility more fires could start up in New Jersey and Connecticut on top of the fires they're already dealing with, one of them turning deadly. You see both of them here. One firefighter was killed in Connecticut. Several others ended up in the hospital. Our climate team tells us the risk will stay high over the next few weeks because it's been warmer than usual and drier than usual. Not a single drop of rain has fallen in those areas all month. Meteorologist Bill Cairns is joining us now. Okay. When does that change? When do they get some relief? When might Mother Nature help out a little bit with the fire risks in these states?
It's going to be at least a couple of weeks. I mean, we need soaking rains and we need colder temperatures. We have had a little bit of a cool down in the Northeast, but it's still, brutally hot throughout the southern half of the country. The relative humidity is what the firefighters watch, is when it's really low and really dry. That means fires can spread rapidly. So that's in the middle of the country. It's just dry everywhere, pretty much east of the Rockies. So we do have elevated fire risk and red flag warnings, one from Tulsa near Denver and also here in areas of the Northeast. This will be in through tomorrow. So at least elevated. A lot of brush fires are possible. And usually these are human caused too by cars. And drought right now, Hallie, we're at about 2% of the country's in moderate drought. This is the highest in over 2 years as the drought expands.
Even though the tropics are kind of quiet now, that may change soon, right? We might have something new to watch as we turn the corner into November next week.
Yeah, this is a story that'll gain traction if our long-range models continue.
I hate when you say that, Bill. That's like my least favorite thing to come out of your mouth, I got to tell you.
I know. So like 7 days, nothing, right? But in the Western Caribbean, after we head through the first week of November, there's a 40% chance of development. And the reason that this is important is because our computer models are hinting that this development would then head northward. So our European computer model is on the weaker side. Our American model is more like a hurricane near Cuba, and that's pretty close to Florida. And then we're getting close to Election Day. So, Hallie, I'm not saying there's going to be like a hurricane or tropical storm close to Election Day, but I can't yet rule out that we could have something nearby. I know that would be like beyond ridiculous, but yeah, that's something to watch.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Bill. Always the bearer of interesting news. Definitely one to watch. Thanks, friend. Appreciate it. Coming up, we got a lot more to get to here on the show, including the latest allegations against Vince McMahon, how a new lawsuit is rocking the wrestling world and the WWE yet again. Plus, why some of the biggest stars of the Hallmark Channel are now suing. New accusations tonight of alleged rampant sexual exploitation of young boys by a WWE announcer that the company and its ex-CEO are accused of doing nothing to prevent. That's according to a new lawsuit claiming that in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s, ringside announcer Melvin Phillips Jr. lured in so-called ring boys as his assistants with the promise of meeting wrestling stars. The suit says that some of them were as young as 12 and 13 years old, allegedly. McMahon, his wife, the WWE, and its parent company all allegedly knew about what was happening, according to the suit, and swept it under the rug. Lawyers for the victims say Phillips would specifically target children from broken homes, then groom, exploit, and sexually abuse them. McMahon's attorney telling NBC News in a statement that the allegations are absurd, defamatory, and utterly meritless. NBC News has reached out to WWE and its parent company, but none of them have responded just yet. Phillips died in 2012. Stephen Romo is joining us now. And Stephen, the lawsuit says that McMahon fired Phillips in the late 80s in 1988, only to rehire him a few weeks later, allegedly on the condition that he steer clear from kids. What else does this lawsuit say?
Yeah, some disturbing allegations from this lawsuit for sure, Hallie. The allegation is that McMahon fired Phillips, then rehired him just 6 weeks later. The suit adds that the accusation that he, in fact, did not steer clear from children. It alleges that the McMahons knew that he did not change his behavior as well. The lawsuit has a quote from a WWE executive where he allegedly said it was an absolute mess. The McMahons clearly knew what was going on, but really did nothing to stop it. The implication being that if Phillips was explicitly told to stay away from children, that it was clear what he was doing, and that it allegedly went on in the 70s, the 80s, up through the early 90s, with accusations dating that far back. By the way, Hallie, often the statute of limitations comes into play here, but in Maryland, they say, child advocates say that there is a window in that statute of limitations that has allowed this lawsuit to potentially go forward.
Apparently, the alleged victims only learned about how much they knew because of this different lawsuit accusing him of sex trafficking, right? And it's coming as McMahon has been at the center of some pretty big scandals recently. There's that new Netflix doc that gets into a lot of this. How much is that at play here, or what else do we know from it?
Yeah, certainly a lot of attention on Vince McMahon from that Netflix documentary, talking about another former WWE employee, Janelle Grant, who had accused McMahon of forcing her into a sexual relationship in a lawsuit that she brought against it, then brought up these other accusations that these victims have come forward with in yet another new lawsuit, the one we're talking about right now. Even though this one is focusing on Phillips, so much came to light in this previous allegations, not to mention that Netflix docuseries you mentioned, which has already put the spotlight shining brightly on the McMahons right now. And as you mentioned earlier, NBC News did reach out to the McMahons along with reps for WWE and did not hear back.
Stephen Romo, thank you very much. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, a jury in Arizona indicting a 17-year-old on terrorism charges. Prosecutors say he planned to use explosives to attack people at the Phoenix Pride Festival. And they say he will be tried as an adult. His lawyer could not immediately be reached for comment. Number 2, the 3 men convicted of murdering Ahmaud Arbery are asking for a new trial over things like issues with some of the jurors. You'll remember Arbery was shot and killed while he was running in Georgia in 2020. All 3 men were sentenced to life in prison a couple years ago. Number 3, Tesla stock today shooting up 22% for its best day in more than a decade. Why? Well, the company put out its earnings report, and turns out they did better than analysts thought they would. Tesla's predicting sales will grow next year. They say they want to put out more affordable cars, too. Number 4, casting director is suing Hallmark, accusing one of its executives of age discrimination. She says the executive instructed her to replace, quote, old talent, like Holly Robinson Peete and Lacey Chabert. And the casting director, who's 79, was fired earlier this year. She says the executive called her too long in the tooth, which basically means too old. Hallmark denies the allegations. Number 5, Halloween's coming up quick, 1 week away, and Google is out with its top costumes of the year. Ray gun is apparently one of the most popular ones. Remember the Australian breakdancer from the Olympics? Sabrina Carpenter. Apparently everybody's searching for like heart corset dresses. Number 1, Bob with the shrunken head from Beetlejuice. Coming up later in the show, why a man had to be rescued from a fishing boat in Hawaii. We're going to show you what went down. And some big new research that could give new hope to millions. Why scientists say a weight loss drug could help fight Alzheimer's. NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day, and because it can be tough to read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. Out of our Western Bureau, new video of the Coast Guard rescuing somebody who was sick from a commercial fishing ship nearly 80 miles from Maui. You can see him getting airlifted here in the dark. He's 35 years old, but he had some kind of stomach pain. He was taken to the hospital. Fortunately, he's now in stable condition. Also out of our Western Bureau, should elephants have the same rights as people? You got one court hearing arguments on that today with an animal rights group trying to get elephants out of a zoo in Colorado Springs. The group says the elephants are unlawfully confined, their words, and they're challenging whether these animals can be considered persons under the law. The Cheyenne Mountain Zoo calls the suit frivolous and says it takes excellent care of its elephants. The zoo says releasing them to the wild or another facility could be stressful because the elephants are used to human care. And out of our Northeast Bureau, a ticker tape parade in Manhattan today celebrating the Liberty's WNBA championship. They defeated the Lynx this weekend. You probably saw that. It was the Liberty's first championship title. Big deal for them. So researchers are saying tonight that the active ingredient in those weight loss drugs like Ozempic and Wegovy can actually reduce the risk of Alzheimer's in people who have diabetes. This is a study just out today that found that this ingredient, semaglutide, was associated with a drop 40 to 70% in risk among type 2 diabetes patients. This could be a big deal, a big breakthrough maybe in the way doctors try to prevent the disease. And it also highlights a possible link between Alzheimer's and diabetes, with some experts saying that the two may be closely related in the brain. Let me bring in our NBC News health contributor, Dr. Natalie Azar. Dr. Natalie, it's good to see you. Walk us through this study, right? We always talk about causation versus correlation. What does this really mean, and how much can we take away from it?
Well, yes. So I'm glad that you brought up the sort of the statistical or the epidemiological angle on this. So this was basically an observational study, which means that they looked at medical records of about 1 million individuals who had type 2 diabetes. And those individuals got one of 7 different diabetes medications, and they followed them for 3 years. And as you said in the intro, there was a 40 to 70% reduction in the development of Alzheimer's disease in the individuals who were treated with semaglutide as opposed to other diabetes medications, leading them to conclude that there might be some sort of intervention here in terms of this treatment that could prevent Alzheimer's. And this would be significant, Hallie, because the current medications that are approved to treat Alzheimer's disease that target that amyloid plaque slow cognitive decline, but they do not prevent the disease. And that's why this is so groundbreaking. The makers of Ozempic and Wegovy are actually studying just that in phase 2 and phase 3 trials right now, where they're looking at semaglutide versus placebo. And that's really the gold standard, Hallie. And if that pans out, that's going to be a game changer.
Explain the link, right, between diabetes and Alzheimer's more than that. Can you pull on that thread? Because I think that's interesting to people, that the two could be, I think related is the wrong word, but maybe some sort of connective tissue there.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, we all know that there's a lot of, potential genetic risk into Alzheimer's and a lot of environmental exposures. But the risk factors that we know can be associated with Alzheimer's, such as age, smoking, obesity, hypertension, diabetes, a sedentary lifestyle, smoking, those are all things that we know, and many of them you might also recognize as risk factors for heart disease. And so the theory here, Hallie, is that there's probably something that's going on with the treatment that's affecting the blood vessels in the brain that actually results in a reduction in risk. And what's important here, of course, to highlight is that we don't know yet whether there's an independent effect of the medicine that's reducing the risk, or if it's truly and simply from lowering the diabetes, lowering the blood sugar, and if that's more of an indirect effect. All of these things, Hallie, again, to be continued and being studied as we speak in these later term trials right now.
Dr. Natalie Azar, super interesting. Thank you so much for breaking it down for us. Appreciate it. Still to come, some new details tonight about how many North Korean troops may be helping Russia. Our Keir Simmons asking Putin directly about it. We've got that coming up right after the break. Tonight, Russian President Vladimir Putin is not denying the presence of North Korean troops in Russia right now. Here's what he told our Keir Simmons today.
The actions of Russia have not escalated things in the Ukraine, but the US have certainly done that. They've even publicly declared how much money they're pouring into it. We have to have further negotiations with North Korea. We'll see how that goes.
It comes as South Korean officials say they expect Kim Jong-un to send 12,000 troops to Russia. The U.S. says it has evidence that 3,000 are already there getting trained up, but there's still a whole bunch of questions like where these troops are going, what exactly they will be doing. Keir Simmons is joining us now. And Keir, tell us more about this moment here. You pressing Putin on this influx of North Korean troops, and what it all says about the state of the war in Ukraine now from Russia's perspective.
Yeah, it was the first time that President Putin commented on these allegations from the US, from South Korea, that there are North Korean troops now here in Russia. Now, he trolled us a little bit initially because I asked him about satellite images that are said to show North Korean troops here in Russia. You know, he kind of did that Putin thing of joking about it, of being sarcastic about it. But then that answer that you played there, and he also talked about a comprehensive strategic agreement between Russia and North Korea that was signed this year that includes a clause, and he mentioned it specifically, that calls on North Korea to support Russia in a conflict and vice versa. And I think that's just one example. You ask about the implications. That's just one example of where this can get really escalatory, is that if you think about it, and we know this is not something that's on the cards, obviously, but just in terms of the implications, if North Korea ended up in a war with South Korea, would Russia have to support North Korea? Effectively, what's happening is that the Ukraine war is being extended all the way to Asia, and that has many, many world leaders worried.
Talk about that, right? The fact that this is having a ripple effect all the way, of course, to the Korean Peninsula, especially when it comes to South Korea and their concerns about this moment.
Yeah, they're concerned, and they called the Russian ambassador in, and they're calling for the North Korean troops to be taken back. Now, I mean, listen, we should just say, we mentioned it last night, Hallie, that the US doesn't know what these North Korean troops are going to be used for. There's clearly, you can read between the lines, intelligence suggesting they are going to end up in some kind of combat role with Ukrainian forces. But in a sense, I think from the answer we got today from President Putin, Russia kind of reserves the right to not have that happen. And once again, in another sense, it's just another threat, isn't it, from President Putin? It's another way of ratcheting things up. Just think about it from Ukraine's perspective, too. I mean, Korea has a 1 million-strong army. Now, we're talking about thousands of troops right now, but the message to the Ukrainians is, from the Russians, is we've got enough support that we can keep this going for as long as you can. So it does have ripple effects. Another one might be what other countries might be thinking right now. Well, we'll send some soldiers into this conflict on whichever side, and what implications could that have?
Keir Simmons, live for us there in Russia. Keir, we're glad to have you with us, as always, tonight. Thank you. So that decision to send troops to Russia has ripple effects, as Keir said, in Asia, including in China, with Beijing saying it's not aware of the situation, quote unquote, the situation, and reiterating China's hope for some kind of peaceful settlement of the war. But China supports Russia, right? So that's an extra layer of complication to the already complicated U.S.-China relationship, with the Treasury Department recently announcing new sanctions on 2 Chinese companies accused of directly helping Russia build drones to be used in that invasion of Ukraine. Our Janice Mackey-Freyer just sat down with the U.S. ambassador to China. She's joining us now from Beijing. Congratulations on that interview, Janice. Talk us through what you heard about the status, right, of the relationship now between the U.S. and China, China's support of Russia. Walk us through the headlines.
Well, Nicholas Burns, the U.S. ambassador here, didn't hesitate to openly criticize China for its support of Russia. He told me it's troubling that China will say that it's neutral in the war in Ukraine, but that its actions show the opposite, with protection for Russia diplomatically, economically, strategically. And the U.S. says hundreds of Chinese companies here are exporting so-called dual-use goods to the Russian defense industrial base. Now with North Korea, another China ally, potentially escalating the war, Beijing could face even more pressure from the U.S. and the West. China is already a competitive threat and a strategic rival for the U.S., he says, and he makes no apology for U.S. policy. Here's what he had to say.
Do you think the policy is too hawkish on China?
I think our policy is right. We have to compete. Whether you call it hawkish or not, we have to be clear-eyed by the dangers and the threat that the People's Republic of China poses to the United States, to our national security, whether it's in the Taiwan Strait or the South China Sea, whether it's on China's support for Russia. So it's a complicated relationship. It's a very challenging relationship, but it's without any question the most consequential relationship that we Americans have with any other country in the world.
Ambassador Burns also criticized China for overcapacity, saying some goods are being produced at 2 or 3 times domestic demand, with an eye on dumping the excess on the global market. We're talking about EVs, lithium batteries, solar panels. He says that the risk of China Shock 2.0 is a, quote, genuine threat. Hallie?
So interesting, Janice. I have to tell you, back here in Washington, you know where my head is at, and that is in the election that is just now 12 days away, of course, between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. Give us sort of the vibe check from where you're standing in Beijing about what November 6th may look like here in the U.S.
Well, it's the one issue that Democrats and Republicans can agree on, right? That China is this threat to the U.S. and being tough on China is always part of the election cycle. Look, Beijing is not going to say anything about the election to avoid being accused of interfering, but China's leadership is watching this so closely. The U.S.-China relationship is fragile right now. It's been a lot worse. There have been some improvements. There are official talks now resuming on some levels, but where there's a real disconnect, Hallie, is at the people-to-people level, the level that China's President Xi Jinping is held up as this real arena for cooperation. And this is where Ambassador Burns called out China. Listen to this.
We do find a willingness to cooperate in some areas, but I'll give you an example where it's not happening. On 94 separate occasions in the last 11 months since the San Francisco summit last autumn, the government of China, the security services, have acted to actually impede our efforts here in our embassy in Beijing, in our consulates in China, to carry on basic programs trying to bring Chinese and American people together in a variety of ways: seminars, concerts, you know, just meetings to discuss one issue or another. These are not official meetings between government officials, but between citizens of both of our countries. So, you know, you really can't, they can't have it both ways. You can't say you want to promote people-to-people contacts and then try to actively impede them.
Hallie, when he talks about impeding, he had a grocery list of examples: harassing people, going to meetings, to shows. In one case, even cutting the electricity to an embassy event. And that in itself is revealing of the tripwires here. Remember, China broke off all communications after the balloon incident in February 2023. And the military's just started talking again last month. Nuclear talks were called off recently as a protest over U.S. arms sales to Taiwan. So the diplomatic lines between these two countries are so few these days, and China has shown how easily they can be cut. Hallie?
Janice Mackey-Freyer, thank you very much for that. Really fascinating stuff. Appreciate it. Live from Beijing. Still ahead, a voter ending up in an attack ad for a candidate she says she supports. What she's saying now after facing some pretty big backlash. To tonight's original now, with in-depth reporting on a topic we've been watching. And tonight, it's a woman we featured on this show who became the face of a Trump-supporting group's commercial attacking Vice President Kamala Harris. This is what you're seeing here. Turns out, while that woman was undecided over the summer, days before Joe Biden dropped out of the race, she is not a Trump supporter. In fact, she's a Democrat who now says she is backing Vice President Harris. NBC's Yasmin Vasugian reconnected with her just this week.
Kim Burrell's an anti-gun violence activist and a mom who lost her son to the streets. We interviewed her in July on gun violence in Philadelphia.
And I got the call that no mother wants to get.
We then turned the conversation to politics and the presidential election.
Does everybody know who they're voting for? Or is anybody undecided still?
I'm very undecided.
This was days before Joe Biden dropped out of the race.
How hard has inflation hit you?
It hit me hard. It's hitting me hard.
Who do you blame for it?
I blame the federal government at this point. They're killing us without killing us.
Then several weeks later, this.
Imagine a mother who's making minimum wage trying to feed children. They're killing us without killing us.
This ad from Restoration of America, a conservative PAC supporting Donald Trump, putting her on a split screen with Vice President Harris, an ad Kim never agreed to be a part of.
I'm hearing it from friends, family, people that live all over the country, that my face is splattered across the country.
And here's the hitch. Kim says she's voting for Kamala Harris as a Democrat and has been campaigning for her.
What was it like to see your face and your words on the television promoting Donald Trump?
Wow. I feel very disgusted. I wasn't called about it. I wasn't asked about it. I'm very offended.
Kim says when she blamed the federal government for inflation during our initial interview, she didn't specifically mean the Biden administration.
I was referring to the Trump camp. He gave tax breaks to the rich. I consider myself to be a middle-class person. You're going to make me poor or lower middle class. It's unfair. They're killing us without killing us. And I did not mean Kamala.
Kim felt attacked by the ad and wanted to set the record straight, so she fought back, giving an interview to the Philadelphia Inquirer, held a press conference.
This ad was created without my knowledge or my consent.
With support from the Harris campaign, and reached out to the PAC who produced and funded the ad, sending a cease and desist letter with the help of a lawyer. She never got a response.
Why have you decided to fight this?
Because this is my face, this is my voice, this is my spirit, this is my vulnerability, and no one has a right to use it without my knowledge.
We reached out to the Trump campaign and the Restoration PAC, and they did not respond with a comment. The Restoration PAC, established in 2015, engages in political activities based on time-tested conservative principles. The biggest donor is Richard Uihlein, a billionaire who's contributed nearly $21 million since 2023. That's according to FEC filings. For Kim, what matters more is how she feels the ad jeopardizes her anti-gun violence work.
I talk to young men every single day, and they have to be able to trust me. My credibility is shot.
But Kim will keep fighting for what she believes in, keeping kids in Philly safe, even as her ad continues to run across the country. Yasmin Vasugian, NBC News.
That does it for us for this hour. We've got a lot more coverage picking up right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.